This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Tonight is her yahrzeit Tes Shabbat. Okay, welcome everyone. If you brave the weather tonight, so kol hakavod, you get special schar halicha. Tonight we're going to speak about a topic which is certainly upcoming in the next couple of weeks. We know Purim is coming, and you know me, I like to prepare for Purim many weeks in advance. But the problem with that is that we sometimes overlook Parshas Zachar. So I'm not going to give up my policy of preparing for Purim many weeks in advance, but what we're going to do is we're going to prepare for Purim many weeks in advance. But before that, we're going to learn about Parshas Zachar. And aside from that, this week's Parsha, at the end of the Parsha, talks about Vayavay Amalek. So what better week than to discuss the inyan and the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Okay, and we begin with the pasuk in Sefer Devarim, Parshas Kiseitze, Zachar eis asher asa lecha Amalek b'aderech b'tzeischa miMitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on the road when you left Mitzrayim. Remember. By the way, just to keep you on your toes, and don't worry, we probably won't see everything tonight, but if you turn to number 44, the end of the three psukim about Amalek in Kiseitze, it says, V'haya v'haniach Hashem lekecha lecha mikol ovecha misaviv, when you have respite from the enemy. And then at the end of the pasuk says, Timcha es zeichar Amalek, eradicate the memory of Amalek mitachas hashamayim, loy tishkach, don't forget. Okay, so you need to remember, and don't forget it. Like when your mother says, remember, don't forget, right? So it's actually a mitzvah, it's an asay, it's a command, and it's a negative, it's a loy asay. Remember, don't forget. Is this considered a mitzvah d'oraisa? So if you look in the Sifra, right, you know, just it's important to know that the Torah Sheba'al Peh on Sefer Shemos is called the Mechilta, on Sefer Vayikra is called the Sifra, and on Sefer Bamidbar Devarim it's called the Sifri. So if you look at the Sifra, and the beginning of Parshas Bechukaisai, it comments on the pasuk Zachar es Yom HaShabbos l'kadshay. Remember Shabbos. Okay, how do I remember Shabbos? Do I have to think about it? Do I have to contemplate it? So the Sifra says, it's not enough just to think about it. Because it already says Shamar, preserve it. Shamar means think about it. What does Zachar mean? Zachar means you have to speak about it. Shetehei shoyne beficha, you have to mention Shabbos. And that's why we have a mitzvah of Kiddush. Right? Kiddush Friday night, on account of all the Rishonim agree, Kiddush Friday night is a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's a biblical commandment. That's why Friday night you have to drink more grape juice than Shabbos day, more wine than Shabbos day. It's a biblical mitzvah, Kiddush Friday night. What about, now, the Rambam's opinion, just to be very clear, the Rambam in Perek Chavtes holds that all you need to do, midoraisa, is talk about Shabbos. You don't actually need a cup of wine, midoraisa, according to the Rambam. And according to other Rishonim, Tosfos and Shavuos says, midoraisa, you have to make it on wine. You hear that? According to Tosfos, it's a d'oraisa to even drink wine when you make Kiddush. And according to the Mefarish and Masechta Nazir, you have to drink the wine even midoraisa. So you see, Kiddush on Shabbos is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Which mitzvah? Zachar es Yom HaShabbos l'kadshay. And then the Sifra says, what about Amalek? If you look two lines at the end, V'chein hu omer, Zachar eis asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Yachal b'libcha, you would think, you could just think about it. So that says the Sifra, when it says loy tishkach, don't forget, that itself means don't forget, think about it. What does it mean? Zachar? Zachar means you need to articulate it. You need to verbalize it. You need to speak about it. And likewise the Sifri, Parshas Kiseitze, it says, look at number 3, Zachar asher asa lecha Amalek, Zachar b'peh, v'al tishkach b'lev. When it says don't forget, that means think about it. What does Zachar mean? Zachar means you have to articulate it. So far we've established that both according to the Sifra and the Sifri, there is a mitzvah in the Torah to verbalize what Amalek did to us and not to forget it. When do you fulfill this mitzvah? When do you do it? So if you look at the Rambam is found in two places. Look at number 4. The Rambam in Hilchos Melachim, the Rambam says it's a mitzvah saseh to destroy the progeny of Amalek, shenemar timcha zeicha Amalek. And says the Rambam, not only is it a mitzvah to destroy Amalek, Mitzvahs asay lizkar tamid ma'asav haraim v'arevasai. It's a mitzvah to remember always his bad actions. So if the Rambam would walk into the room right now, first thing we'd do, we'd all stand up for the Rambam. And we would ask, Rambam, when do you fulfill the mitzvah? The Rambam says, read my piece. I said when. Tamid. Tamid. The Rambam says tamid, always. Now what does always mean? That's a big question. What does always mean? But we are all familiar that the Shabbos before Purim, all of a sudden the shul fills up more than it usually does, and especially around laning time when we take out that second Sefer Torah, and the rabbi makes all these big announcements how everyone has to listen carefully to the reading of Parsha Zachar, and the Baal Koreh has to have everyone in mind, and the listeners have to have in mind to be Yotzei the Mitzvah. And even though normally the Baal Koreh, when he reads it, nobody could hear anything he's saying, when it comes to Zachar, all of a sudden, Zachar, right? Every word is carefully, like he's saying the most important thing in the world. It would seem, from our practice, that when do we fulfill the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? Once a year. Is once a year Tamid? I don't think so. Does once a year sound like what the Rambam says, Tamid? And if you look in the Rambam, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Mitzvah Kuf Peites, the Rambam says, Mitzvah HaKuf Peites, the 189th Mitzvah in the Torah, Shetzivanu Lizkar Masha Asalanu Amalek. We are commanded to remember what Amalek did for us. Mehekdimai Laharalanu, that he advanced to do bad to us. And when should we talk about it? B'shenoy Marzeh B'chol Eis V'Eis. All times, at every time and time. Does that sound to you like once a year? Doesn't sound to me like once a year. Sounds like the Rambam is saying, Tamid, b'chol eis v'eis. It sure seems like the Rambam holds that this mitzvah is a mitzvah that's incumbent upon us often, very often. We don't know exactly how to define often yet, but it certainly doesn't sound like our practice of making a big deal about Zachar once a year. Now we say, well, Rabbi, let's see what the Rambam says when he tells us about Parshas Zachar, because we know that there's a special mitzvah of laning 4 Parshios a year. Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zachar, Parshas Chodesh, Parshas Para, Parshas Chodesh. What does the Rambam say over there? So if you look at number 7, the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah, where he brings the laws of Kriyas HaTorah, and he talks about how every Shabbos you have to read from the Torah, the Rambam says in Parak Yud Gimel Halacha Chaf, that 4 times a year you have to read special readings. Parshas Shkolim, the Rambam says. And the second one is Zachar. And the third one is Para. And the fourth one is Chodesh. Does the Rambam say, by the way, when you lane Zachar, you should have in mind to fulfill the biblical obligation of Zechiras Amalek? The Rambam doesn't say anything. He doesn't make any differentiation between Shkolim and Zachar. And between Para and Zachar. And between HaChodesh and Zachar. It would sure seem like the Rambam holds that the biblical obligation of Zachar somehow we fulfill on a constant basis. And when we lane Parsha Zachar, listen carefully, not only is it not a mitzvah d'oraisa, not only is it's not a mitzvah d'rabbanan. Parsha Zachar, according to the Rambam, is not only not a biblical mitzvah, it's not even a rabbinic mitzvah. In other words, I'll tell you the following nafkamina. When you come to shul on a regular Shabbos, right? And they're laning Parshas Beshalach this week. Do you have to have in mind, I have in mind now to be Yotzei the mitzvah of hearing Parshas Beshalach. You ever hear anybody do that? No, there's no such thing. When you go to shul, do you have to have in mind, I'm mechavein to be yotzei the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah? No, there's a regular procedure of Kriyas HaTorah that the way it works is every week we lane a new parsha. Over the course of the year you finish the Torah. On the Yom Tovim you lane something relevant to that Yom Tov. For example, do you ever hear someone come to shul? I'm coming to shul today to hear the Kriyas HaTorah of Shavuos. There's no such thing. You're in shul, you listen to the Torah. There's no special kavanos that the Baal Koreh has to have. There's no special kavanos that the listeners have to have. The Rambam sure seems like Parsha Zachar is no different than any other Kriyas HaTorah over the course of the year. And this is the diuk of the Sefer Emek Bracha. The Emek Bracha was a Talmud of the Brisker Rav Aryeh Fumaranchik. Aryeh Fumaranchik was a tremendous lamdan, tremendous baki. The Gedolim said about him that he passed away at a very young age. The Gedolim said about him he had the koyach to be like the Chafetz Chaim. And he was a Talmud, the Brisker Rav held of him very much. And he wrote Svarim on Hilchos Yisrael, Hilchos Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, Hilchos Chumash Amasros. His Svarim are very much niskabel, especially in the Olam HaBrisk, together with the Svarim of the Griz and the Beis Halevi. And he's medayik from the Rambam, that the fact that the Rambam, when he talks about the Mitzvah of Zachar and Hilchos Malachim, says Tamid, and the fact that the Rambam, when he talks about the Mitzvah of Zechira in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he says B'chol Eis V'Eis, it indicates that the Rambam holds there's nothing special about Parshas Zachar. And in fact, when the Rambam talks about Parshas Zachar, he doesn't make any differentiation at all between Zachar and any of the other Parshas, which indicates the Rambam holds Parshas Zachar is no different than Parshas Beshalach. Okay? And so now, listen carefully. What does the Rambam then mean when he says, B'chol Eis? What does the Rambam mean that you fulfill the mitzvah tamid? We have to try to understand that. But the Emek Bracha points out that the pashtus of the Gemara, the pashtus of Talmud Bavli, is that there is an independent mitzvah, at least on some occasion, to read the episode of Amalek. And that is from the Gemara in Magilla Daf Yud Ches, where the Gemara wants to know, what is the source? Right? Let's say the Balkari gets up to the bima, and the Balkari says, we say, very good, but where's the Megillah? By now I know it by heart. Who doesn't know it by heart? Are you Yotze? You're not Yotze. Why? Kara al pelo yatsa. So Gemara wants to know, how do you know you can't read the Megillah Baal Peh? The Gemara says we make a Gzeira Shava. It says by the Megillah Niz Karim Benasim, Zechira. And it says that by Amalek Zechira. Just like Amalek, it has to be Mitoich HaSefer, so too by Megillah it has to be Mitoich HaSefer. So the Emek Bracha points out that would seem to indicate, not like the Rambam, that there is some type of obligation to read from a Sefer, to read from the Torah, at least on some occasion, about the episode of Amalek. And certainly that's our practice. Once a year, we make a big deal about the fact that we're opening up a Sefer just to read about the episode of Amalek. So where does our practice come from? Our practice comes from Tosfos in Masechta Brachos, Adaf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. It's also Tosfos in Magilla Yud Zayin Amud Beis. And it's like this. You ready? The Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, we'll just say the introduction very briefly, you don't even have to know the introduction, but just in case you're wondering. The Gemara says like this, that according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, you could say Shema in any language. You could say it in English, in French, Swahili, Portuguese, whatever language you like. Says the Gemara, how does Rabbi know that? He learned it from a pasuk, V'hayu. V'hayu says, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that's the opinion of the Chachamim. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that you have to say Kriya Shema in Lashon HaKodesh. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds you have to say Kriya Shema in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Gemara, how does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi know it from? It says V'hayu. It should be say Shema the way it is. Gemara says, well, wait a second. Why do I need a pasuk that you have to say Shema in Lashon HaKodesh? Don't you have to say everything in Lashon HaKodesh? Says the Gemara, it must be Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds everything else, every other mitzvah you could say in any language. And that's why I need a special pasuk to say that you have to say Shema in Lashon HaKodesh. So says Tosfos, what other mitzvahs are there? There are no mitzvahs that you have to say that you have to say at all. Besides Shema, what mitzvahs are there that you have to read? So Rashi in Megillah says, well, you have to read from the Torah. So Tosfos says, yeah, but that's not a mitzvah d'oraisa. So when we lay in the Torah on Shabbos, is that a biblical mitzvah? It's a takana of Ezra. So Tosfos says, you know what the Gemara is talking about? There is a mitzvah d'oraisa of reading from the Torah. You know which mitzvah that is? Reading Parshas Zachar. That's what the Gemara means. That Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says you have to say Shema b'Lashon HaKodesh. But all other mitzvahs of reading could be in any language. Like what? Like Zachar. Says Tosfos, reading Parshas Zachar from a Sefer Torah is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And that's what we do. So if you want to know where does our custom come from, that we make a big deal about reading Parshas Beshalach from Sefer Torah, that is the opinion of Tosfos. Now, I don't have an answer for this. Maybe you could help me out. And that is, we're going to see, the Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos, and not like the Rambam, which is very unusual. You know, the Mechaber has a rule that whenever you have Machlekes Tosfos and the Rambam, he always paskins like the Rambam. But in this case, for some reason, he doesn't. Why? Maybe because of what we mentioned, because the Pashtus of Shas is mashma, like Tosfos, that there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to read Parshas Zachar. But in any event, this is the opinion of Tosfos, that it's not enough just to read it from your Chumash, you have to read it from a Sefer Torah. What about the following issue? There's a big mitzvah, and that mitzvah is davening with a minyan. Right? You ever hear that mitzvah? Yeah? Good. Yeah? You have to daven with a minyan, right? Now, even if you want to say like the Rambam, right? We know the Rambam holds davening is a biblical mitzvah, at least once a day. What about davening with a minyan? Is davening with a minyan a mitzvah d'oraisa, or is it a mitzvah d'rabbanan? It's a mitzvah d'rabbanan. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. Even though it's learned out of Psukim, the Gemara in Magilla learns it out from Psukim. You have it on your sheet, number 25. The Gemara says, V'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. You should sanctify yourself among Toich b'nei Yisrael. And Toich refers to 10 people, like it says by Kairach, Ibadlu mitoich ha'eda, and Eda is 10, like we learned from the Meraglim. But bottom line is, davening with a minyan is a mitzvah d'rabbanan. So you ready for a story? This is one of the most interesting stories you ever heard, at least today. The Gemara brings down a story. The story goes like this. Number 13. Maisa, there's a story. Rabbi Elazar. Shenichnas beis hakneses, he came into a shul. V'loi matza asara, he couldn't find 10 people. Yeah, you hear? The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? He came into a shul, and he couldn't find a minyan. So what did he do? He happened to have an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish slave. And you know the halacha is if you free your non-Jewish slave, part of freeing him is he becomes Jewish, he converts. So he freed his slave to make a tzenta, to make a tent for the minyan. You like that story? You hear it? He had 9 people, he couldn't find a minyan. He texted everyone he knows, but nobody listens to the rabbi anymore when he texts them. Everyone says, no, whatever. So, right, the same old story. So what's he going to do? He has to be Meshacher his Eved Kanani. He has to free his Eved Kanani. Ask the Gemara, you're not allowed to free an Eved Kanani. There's a mitzvah sasei d'oraisa to work your Eved Kanani until the end of his life. Actually, says the Gemara, if you free your Eved Kanani, you're over an asei d'oraisa of la'olam b'hem tavodu. If you have a non-Jewish slave, you're not allowed to free them. Yeah, tell it to Abraham Lincoln, but that's the halacha. If you have a non-Jewish slave, you're not allowed to free la'olam b'hem tavodu. What? La'olam. No, not over here. La'olam is la'olam. Yeah? Says the Gemara, mitzvah shani. For the sake of a mitzvah, you're allowed to violate the asei d'oraisa of not freeing an Eved Kanani. By the way, if you look in the Gemara in Gittin, Lamed Chesam and Beis, the Gemara ends there. Mitzvah shani. For the sake of a mitzvah, you're allowed to free your Eved Kanani. The Gemara in Brachos though continues. The Gemara asks, mitzvah haba ba'avera. What do you mean it's a mitzvah to make a minyan? Now, rabbis, listen carefully. You hear what's going on? The Gemara is saying that the mitzvah of davening with a minyan, which is only d'rabbanan, is more important than a mitzvah sasei d'oraisa of la'olam b'hem tavodu. So, right, you see from here, the Mishnah Berurah points this out. You see from here the importance of davening with a minyan. Davening with a minyan is even greater than a mitzvah d'oraisa. Because, you know, for a mitzvah d'oraisa, you can't free your Eved Kanani. Because the Gemara is going to say, what do you mean you need to do a mitzvah, but you're doing the mitzvah at the expense of doing an avera? You're not to free Eved Kanani. Says the Gemara, mitzvah d'rabim shani. A mitzvah of the tzibur is even more important than not violating the asei d'oraisa of freeing your slave. So listen carefully. Here you have a slave. The Torah warns you, don't free him. If you free him, you violate an asei d'oraisa. Let's say you were stuck, you didn't have a lulav and esrog. And the only way you could get a lulav and esrog is if somehow the Eved says, if you free me, I'll get you a lulav and esrog. Would you be allowed to free the slave to get a lulav and esrog? No. Let's say you didn't have tefillin. And you didn't have tefillin. And this Eved will get you tefillin if you free him. You could not free the Eved to get yourself a pair of tefillin. But to make a minyan, you're allowed to free your Eved Kanani to make a minyan. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Yes, davening with a minyan is d'Rabbanan. But it's a d'Rabbanan that's more important than nearly any d'Oraisa. Think about that. It's a Mishnah Berurah. Davening with a minyan, yeah, it's a d'Rabbanan, but mitzvah d'Rabim shani. It's a mitzvah b'tzibur. Okay. Comes the Rosh, listen carefully, comes the Rosh, and the Rosh says, you see from here, that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of the tzibur is even more important than an asay d'Oraisa of la'olam b'hem ta'avodu. Says the Rosh, not so fast. You have no proof maybe that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan is even more important than a mitzvah sasay d'Oraisa. Right? From this Gemara, the Rosh wants to derive that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of a tzibur, of davening with a minyan, is even more important than an asay d'Oraisa of la'olam b'hem ta'avodu. Says the Rosh, maybe not so fast. Maybe you know what they needed a minyan for? You know what Rabbi Elazar needed a minyan for? Parsha Zachar! Says the Rosh, maybe when Rabbi Elazar came into shul and he couldn't find a minyan, he wasn't talking about 9:15 Maariv. He wasn't talking about 7 o'clock Shachris. He was talking about Shabbos Zachar, he didn't have a minyan. And for Zachar, you need a minyan d'Oraisa. Says the Rosh, no. It's not mashma in the Gemara, it was Dafka Parsha Zachar. It was talking about any case. But you see from the Rosh, a chidush that's out of this world. That for Parsha Zachar, not only do you need a minyan, you need a minyan midoraisa. On a biblical level, you need a minyan. You say, what? Why in the world would I need a minyan on a biblical level? I don't need a minyan midoraisa to say Shema. I don't need a minyan d'Oraisa to daven Shemona Esrei. It's only d'Rabbanan I need a minyan. But the Rosh, who entertains the possibility that when Rabbi Elazar came in to free the Eved Kanani, he wasn't doing it to make a minyan for Maariv. He was doing it to make a minyan for Parsha Zachar. And therefore, says the Rosh, maybe you have no proof that a mitzvah, d'Rabbanan, is more important than a asay d'Oraisa of la'olam b'hem ta'avodu, because maybe we're talking about a minyan for Parsha Zachar and minyan for Zachar d'Oraisa. So the Rosh obviously holds that for Parsha Zachar you need a minyan min ha-Torah. You ever hear such a big chiddush? You're going to go home tonight and you say, what do you learn in Torah Semes? You say, you know what the Rosh says? The Rosh says that for Parsha Zachar you need a minyan on a biblical level. They're going to say, what? Where were they saying over there? Right, Isaac? Why would that be? Why would you need a minyan min ha-Torah for anything? Why would you need 10 people? I don't need 10 people to put on tefillin. I don't need 10 people to put on tzitzis. I don't need 10 people midoraisa for anything. Why do I need 10 people to hear Parsha Zachar? Do we paskin like the Rosh? You better believe it. Shulchan Aruch, in a very interesting place, in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah, first of all, the Shulchan Aruch says like this. Shulchan Aruch says, once the Baal Kari starts to read the Torah, you're now to talk, even in learning, even bein gavra legavra. You know bein gavra legavra, when everyone makes the mishabech, and all of a sudden everyone's, right? You're not even allowed to talk in divrei Torah bein gavra legavra. Now, it could be the Mishnah Berurah, I think, is lenient, that if you're speaking in Torah, you're allowed to say it between aliyos. But what if you just want to ask somebody, you know, is it snowing outside? Are you allowed to do that bein gavra legavra? Which poskim say you're allowed to talk about it? You let me know. Yeah, you let me know. None on the page, yeah? But then the Mishnah Berurah talks about, well, maybe you could be lenient if you learn all day, all week, and you started learning before Kriyas HaTorah, then maybe you could learn during Kriyas, but not Parsha Zachar, says the Mechaber. He says, V'chol zeh eino inyan leParsha Zachar, shehem be'asara midoraisa. Wow. Shulchan Aruch paskins not like the Rambam. Not just like Tosfos, that biblically you have to read from a Torah, Parshas Zachar, that you need a minyan midairaisa for Parshas Zachar. That is a major chiddush, and the Shulchan Aruch writes this in Siman Tafresh Pehei. Also in the name of a Yesh Oimrim. You see, it's interesting. In the halachos of the Da'at Parshios, he brings in the name of a Yesh Oimrim that Parshas Zachar is Dairaisa, but in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah just says straight out, Parshas Zachar is Dairaisa with 10 people. And the $1 million question is, why in the world would you need 10 people for Parshas Zachar? Why? You want to say midrabanan, that I don't have a problem with. You want to say it's like davening with a minyan, good. But why do you need a minyan midairaisa? Comes along the Keren Oira. Rabbi Yitzchak Minkovisky. Rabbi Yitzchak Minkovisky was the brother of the Mishkanos Yaakov, and he was a very smart man. He never wanted to be a rabbi. Right? So he used to learn with his brother, who is the Rav of Karlin. And then when his brother passed away, he had no choice. He had to become the Rav of the city. Now he was a very compassionate Rav. See, if somebody would come to him, Binyani Isser V'Heter, and say, Rabbi, is this kosher or treif? So if he realized the person was poor, and if he realized it was treif, he would say, you know what, it's treif. But here, this piece of meat I have over here, it's kosher. You take this one. So he wasn't just a big Talmid Chacham, he was also of a great Baal Chesed. So he is bothered by this question that we're asking. And that is, why should Parshas Zachar need a minyan? You ever hear, Zachar Siyam HaShabbos L'Kadshay, you have to make Kiddush with a minyan. You ask, so how come you're not making Kiddush? I only have 3 people, I'm waiting for a minyan. There's no halacha to have a Kiddush with a minyan. Right? It would be ludicrous. Imagine a guy, what are you doing? I'm waiting, I'm thinking about what Miriam did about her Lashon Hara, but I'm waiting for another 9 people to come over. Why in the world would you need a minyan for Parshas Zachar? Says the Keren Oira. This is the big chiddush of the night, and that is, there are 2 mitzvahs in the Torah. One is to remember what Amalek did to us, and the second mitzvah is to destroy Amalek. Yeah, but you have to understand their perspective, Amalek's perspective. Everybody has, right, like these liberal attitudes. Everybody has different viewpoints and understanding. We have to respect all mankind. And they probably had a very important point of view, right? Nonsense. The Torah says, you got to take care of these guys. Yeah, but humanity, God created humanity. Amalek attacked us. We were unprovoked. And they weren't coming only after us. It was a war against Hashem. It was a war against God. And we have to destroy them. So we have 2 mitzvahs. One is to remember what Amalek did. And one is to destroy Amalek, to fight Amalek. Says the Keren Oira. Who is obligated to destroy Amalek? Am I obligated as an individual? No. Are you obligated as an individual? No. Who's obligated? The tzibur, the congregation. Says the Keren Oira, a chiddush, that if the mitzvah of destroying Amalek devolves on the tzibur, is incumbent on the tzibur, on the congregation, says the Keren Oira, why do you have to remember what Amalek did to us? Just to be well versed in ancient history. It's not to remember what happened, it's to remember so you know what you will need to do. It's remember what they did so that you will destroy them. In other words, says the Keren Oira, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek is contingent upon destroying Amalek. And therefore, since destroying Amalek is a mitzvah on the tzibur, remembering what Amalek did is also incumbent and devolves on the tzibur. And that is the reason why the mitzvah, according to Tosfos, is only to read it with 10 people. Because there's no independent mitzvah to remember what Amalek did. It's remember what they did in order to destroy them. And since the mitzvah of destroying them is on the tzibur, the mitzvah of remembering is also on the tzibur, and therefore you need 10 people. It's an interesting chiddush, by the way. If you look in the Rambam, at the end of, when he lists all the 248 positive commandments of the Torah, he says, by the way, the Rambam says, some of these mitzvahs are on the individual, and some of them are on the tzibur. For example, the Rambam says very clearly, the mitzvah of destroying Amalek is a mitzvah incumbent on the tzibur. You look at number 18. The Rambam says, what are mitzvahs incumbent on the tzibur? He says, building the Beis HaMikdash, making a king, and destroying Amalek. So too, says the Karanoira, remembering Amalek is also a mitzvah that is incumbent on the tzibur. Okay. So Rabbi said, I just want to emphasize this chiddush because I want to point out another 4 nafkaminas that come out according to this understanding, that there's no independent mitzvah to remember what Amalek did. The mitzvah is to remember what they did in order to. The mitzvah is to remember what they did in order to. By the way, if you look back, I skipped the Ramban in number 6. The Ramban seems pretty clear to express this idea. The Ramban says in number 6, in the left-hand side, the first line, the Ramban says, "V'hanochoin be'inai." It is correct in my eyes, shehu loymar, that what it means to say is, "Shalai tishkach ma sha'asa lanu Amalek." Don't forget what Amalek did. Ad shenimcha shemoi, until you wipe out his name. And to tell our children, this is what Amalek did, and that's why we have to destroy him. So Ramban seems to enunciate this almost, that the mitzvah to remember is remember in order to destroy them. And you could even make the case that the Rambam seems to say that, because the Rambam, look at number 5, the Rambam says we should think about it. Remember in order to fight against them. So this is not so radical. I believe it is based in the language of the Rishonim. But I'm going to tell you another nafkamina, and that is, do women have to hear Parsha Zachar? Well, again, don't judge by what people do. Yeah, they make a big deal about it, but do they need to come to hear Parsha Zachar? The Sefer HaChinuch writes, women are categorically exempt from the mitzvah of Parsha Zachar. Why? Because, says the Sefer HaChinuch number 19, this mitzvah is only incumbent on males because they're the ones who have to fight the war. But women, it's like the Gemara says in Kedushin, Isha, Lasais, Mochama. Women don't go to war. So you say, Sefer HaChinuch, who cares if women don't go to war? What does remembering the history of the Jewish people have to do with who's going to actually destroy Amalek? So you see from the Sefer HaChinuch also this idea that the mitzvah of Zechira is not an independent mitzvah to remember, but it's remember in order to destroy. And if the women are practically speaking not going to be the ones fighting the war, then says the Sefer HaChinuch, he feels they would be exempt from the mitzvah of Parshas Zachar. The Minchas Chinuch asks, why should that be? Who told the Chinuch that remembering is in order to? What? All of a sudden the Sefer HaChinuch is darshaning, taima dekra. All of a sudden he's sticking in his own rationale into the Torah. The Torah says remember. Why? That's what Hashem decreed. And therefore the Sefer HaChinuch says, the Minchas Chinuch asks, think about the following. Let's say when Mashiach comes, are you going to put on talis every day? Yeah. You're going to put on tefillin every day? Yeah. Is there going to be a mitzvah to remember Amalek? Well, if you already destroyed Amalek, is there going to be a mitzvah? Says the Minchas Chinuch. I feel, of course there will be a mitzvah. No mitzvahs will become batal la'asad lavai. But according to the Sefer HaChinuch, if the whole reason for the mitzvah is remember in order to destroy, then once you destroy them, it would come out. Then there's no reason to fulfill the mitzvah of remembering. So basically what we have is a fundamental difference in how to understand what this mitzvah is. Is it an independent mitzvah, an inherent mitzvah? Remember what Amalek did. Why? Because Hashem said so. That's why. And in that case, you shouldn't need a minyan. Why should you need a minyan? It's a mitzvah. Every person has to remember. And in that case, should women be mechuyaves? Yeah, why not? Women also have to remember. And will this mitzvah apply when Mashiach comes? Minchas Chinuch says, yeah, it's a mitzvah to remember. Nothing to do with whether you're going to destroy them or not. But the chiddush that we are suggesting, the chiddush of the Keren Oira, is that it's not an independent mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to remember in order to destroy them. and destroying them is mutal alat tzibur, is incumbent on the congregation. And therefore zechira, which is in order to destroy them, is also incumbent on the congregation. That's why you need a minyan. And perhaps that is why women, like the Sefer HaChinuch says, would be exempt from zechiras Amalek, because they have no connection to the war. They're not the ones fighting on the battlefront. And in that case, Minchas Chinuch would say that the Sefer HaChinuch would hold that when Mashiach comes, and you've already destroyed Amalek, there's no more mitzvah to remember what they did. Okay, I'm going to tell you a side question, a point of interest. This idea that women don't go to war, right? Like the Gemara in Kedushin says, "V'chidarach shalisha lasis machama," and therefore the Sefer HaChinuch says women don't go to war, and they don't have to destroy Amalek. They don't have to remember either. So the Minchas Chinuch asks a very interesting question. What do you mean women don't go to war? It's a Mishnah in Masechta Soita. Doesn't the Mishnah say that's by Milchemes Rishus? But Milchemes Mitzvah, the Mishnah says explicitly, Afilu kala mechupasa yoitzin lekras milchama. That if you have a Milchemes Mitzvah, even a woman, she's standing under the chuppah, the guy's about to say Harei at, and all of a sudden the siren goes off, and he runs out, he takes his gun, says the Mishnah, she's right behind him. So the Asa Minchas Chinuch, what is the Sefer HaChinuch saying? That women don't have a mitzvah of zechira, because since they don't have a mitzvah to destroy Amalek, they don't have a mitzvah to remember either. Is fighting against Amalek a Milchemes Harashus? It's a Milchemes Mitzvah. So then women are mechuyeves in Milchemes Mitzvah. Yeah? This is a very interesting question. Very contemporary issue. Yeah? The Gemara in Kedushin says women don't go to war. The Mishnah says in Saita, Milchemes Mitzvah, afilu kala mechupasa. You ready for this one? Says the Radvaz is on the page of the Rambam. The Rambam quotes the Mishnah in Saita that afilu kala mechupasa, she's yotzei. Says Radvaz, she goes to war. The Gemara says in Kedushin, women don't go to war. You want to know what it means? Says Radvaz. It means like this. If the husband's going to war, what's the woman going to do? Who's she going to cook for? So now she has to go and cook for him on the war front. Till then, she was cooking at home. Now she has to go cook for him by the war front. She's not fighting a war. She's not fighting. She go, woman don't. Ein derech isha lases machama. Yoitzin means not yoitzin lekras machama is she got to feed her husband. So where is he? If he's home, you like that one, right? Yeah. But that's what the Radvaz says. Now, if you say like that, would a woman be mechuyeves to do that by Milchemes Amalek? I don't know. There's another very interesting teretz, and that is the teretz of the Marcheshes. You ever heard the Marcheshes? Marcheshes is Rav Chanoich Henoch Eiger. Chanoich Eiges, excuse me. Rav Chanoich Henoch Eiges. And Rav Chanoich Henoch Eiges, after the death of Rav Chaim Oizer, was appointed by the Olam HaYeshivos as the Sar HaTorah. He was considered the preeminent lamdan after when Rav Chaim Oizer passed away. He wrote a very lamdish sefer Marcheshes, and he says like this: when the Mishnah says in Saita that a kala is yotzei mechupasa for Milchemes Mitzvah, that's only a milchama to conquer Eretz Yisrael, because our women mechuyeves in the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Why not? So mitzvah saseh she'ein hazman grama. So therefore, since she's mechuyeves, like the Mishnah says in Ksubis, she could force her husband to go up to Eretz Yisrael. She is obligated in the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So she would also be able to participate in Milchemes Mitzvah of Kibush Haaretz. However, Milchemes Amalek doesn't live in Eretz Yisrael. He's not part of the Zayin Amamin. And therefore, that type of war, a woman would not go out to, even though it's Milchemes Mitzvah. But in any event, what I want to point out is the ramification of the chiddush that we're making. The chiddush that we're saying is that the mitzvah of zechira is not an independent mitzvah of remembering what Amalek did. It's remember what they did in order to destroy them. That could be a reason why you need a minyan, because just like destroying them is on the tzibur, remembering is on the tzibur. That could be a reason to exempt women from zechira. That could be a reason maybe the mitzvah won't be applicable once Amalek is destroyed. I'll tell you another very interesting nafkamina. Before I get to that, I can tell you one. You have to halt cup. You ready? Yeah. Everybody up? Everyone up? Everyone down? Yeah? Everyone good? Open the windows a little bit. Yeah? Listen carefully. The Binyan Sion, the Binyan Sion, the Shas Chuvas Binyan Sion is written by the Archaner of Yaakov Ettlinger. And Rav Yaakov Ettlinger reports from his Rabbi Avram Bing, who is a Talmud of Rav Nosson Adler. Nosson Adler, he calls the Chassid Shebekuna, the Rabbi the Chassam Sofer. So again, Rav Nosson Adler's Talmud was Rav Avram Bing. Rav Avram Bing wrote that women are mechuyeves in Parsha Zachar. And he says, I have a Kabbalah from my Rebbe, Rav Nosson Adler, that women are mechuyeves in Parsha Zachar. And Rav Nosson Adler would tell his mishareses in the house, stop cleaning and come to hear Parsha Zachar. And says the Archaner, and that is my custom, I follow my Rebbe, Rav Avram Bing, that women are mechuyeves in Parsha Zachar. But the Archaner got a letter that maybe you could prove from the Rosh that women are exempt from listening to Parsha Zachar. Why? Listen carefully. Because the Rosh said that the Gemara seems to indicate that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of a rabbim is even greater than the mitzvah d'Oraisa of Lo'olam Mahem Tavodu. And that's why making a minyan would even push off not freeing your slave. To which the Rosh said, maybe you don't have a proof, because maybe he freed his slave to make a minyan for Parsha Zachar. So they asked the Archaner, wait a second, if women are mechuyeves in Parsha Zachar, and we know an Eved Kenani is mechuyev in any mitzvah a woman is chayiv in, so if a woman is chayiv in Parsha Zachar, then an Eved Kenani is chayiv in Parsha Zachar. Well, if the Eved Kenani is chayiv in Parsha Zachar, why would he free his Eved Kenani to make a minyan for Parsha Zachar? He's mechuyev anyway. So the fact that he had to free his Eved Kenani to make a minyan for Parsha Zachar, that indicates avodim are pater from Parsha Zachar, and thereby women would also be pater from Parsha Zachar. This is one of the famous kashas in the Olam HaYeshivos. The kasha brought in the Shas Chuvas Binyan Sion, that it would seem from the Rosh that women are exempt from Parsha Zachar, because otherwise, why would he have to free the Eved Kenani? If the Eved Kenani is chayiv, let him make the minyan. Says the Archel, now what kind of question is that? Yes, women are mechuyeves in Parsha Zachar, and avodim Kenanim are mechuyev in Parsha Zachar, but you need a minyan. And if you're not a male adult, non-Eved, you can't make a minyan. So just because he freed him, he didn't free him because otherwise he wouldn't be obligated in the mitzvah. He would have been obligated anyway. Women are obligated, avodim are obligated. But in order to create a minyan, you need v'nikdashi b'soich b'nei Yisrael. V'loi b'nois Yisrael, v'loi avodim kenanim. The same way, let's say a Yisrael brought a carbon. Just because, says Archaner, he's mechuyev in a carbon, it doesn't mean you don't need a kohen to do the avodah of the carbon. So too, just because women are mechuyev in Parsha Zachar and avodim are mechuyev in Parsha Zachar, but the minyan has to consist of 10 male adults. Okay. Another nafkamina of this svara that we're saying, that Parshas Zachar, the mitzvah of remembering, is only in order to eradicate them. Another very interesting nafkamina is brought in the Magen Avraham. Okay, so if I were to ask you now, the following question: if I could only make it to shul one time, I could only make minyan one time, either Zachar or Megillas Esther. What's more important to do with a minyan, Zachar or Megillas Esther? Zachar. Megillas Esther only needs a minyan midrabana. Parsha Zachar needs a minyan midaraisa. And therefore the Magen Avraham speaks out in Siman Taf Reish Pei, that it's more important to hear Parshas Zachar with a minyan than to hear Megillas Esther with a minyan.
Because Esther you do
No, not because you do it 2 times. Because you could do it at home, Esther.
You're getting double.
No, because you could do it at home. You don't need a minyan midaraisa for Esther.
You do Zechiras Amalek and the Mitzvah of reading.
No, how do you do Zechiras Amalek? Because Haman. You're not Mekayim Zechiras Amalek. You have to remember what Amalek did. Not, are you Mekayim Zechiras Amalek by reading books about the Holocaust? Because they come from... You have to remember what Amalek did, yeah?
Right.
So the Magen Avraham says, according to the letter of the law, it's more important to hear Zachar with a minyan than to hear Megillas Esther with a minyan. But let me explain to you, says the Magen Avraham, why more people go to Shul on Purim than they do for Parshas Zachar. You know why? Because if you go to Shul on Purim, you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You could hear Megillas Esther with a minyan. And the Kriyas HaTorah for Purim is from this week's Parsha. Now we understand why we're talking about this week. Vayavay Amalek. So you're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You're going to get Megillas Esther with a minyan, and you're going to get Vayavay Amalek with a minyan. So you're right. Zachar with a minyan is more important than Esther with a minyan. But if you come to hear Esther, you're going to get Zachar anyway. Comes the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, I disagree with the Magen Avraham. The Mishnah Berurah says, if you just read Vayavay Amalek, if you just read this week's Parsha, you know what it says in this week's Parsha? Amalek came, Amalek attacked, Yoshua, they held up his hands, and we weakened them, and Hashem said, Ki yad al keis ka, ki machai emchez, I'm going to wipe out Amalek. There's no mention about your obligation of destroying Amalek, says the Mishnah Berurah. But if you read Parshas Kiseitze, it doesn't say, God says, He's going to destroy Amalek. It says in Kiseitze, you have to destroy Amalek. And since, listen carefully, we're remembering what Amalek did in order that we should destroy them, you can't be Yotzei the Mitzvah by reading Beshalach. You need to hear Kiseitze. So again, you see a very similar machlokes. The Magen Avraham seems to hold that the mitzvah of Zechira, of remembering, is an independent mitzvah. Remember what Amalek did. Why? Because Hashem said so. But the Mishnah Berurah says, no, it's not as simple as that. It's more similar to what the Keren Orah is saying. It's remember what they did in order to destroy them. And therefore, the only way to do that is to read Kiseitze, where it says clearly, remember, and therefore you need to destroy them. But in this week's Parsha, where you're not mentioning anything about your obligation to destroy them, then you will not be Yotzei your Chiyuv. And this is also offered as a suggestion why the Behag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, only lists 1 mitzvah of destroy Amalek, and he doesn't even list the mitzvah of remember what Amalek did. You know why? Because the Bahag says there is no independent mitzvah of remembering. There is just a mitzvah of remembering them in order to destroy them. So we spoke out sort of 5 ramifications of this idea that you remember what Amalek did in order to. It's in order to destroy them. Okay. Now, back to the Rambam. The Rambam said, when is the mitzvah to remember what Amalek did? Tamid. Tamid, the Rambam says. B'choles, the Rambam says. So wait a second. What does that mean? How often is it? How often? What does it mean, Tamid? How often is b'choles? Okay, so for this we have to learn a very important principle. And the principle goes like this. If you look in number 31, we're going to have to skip. We'll try to wrap it up soon. The Stipler, the Kilas Yaakov, tells us a very interesting chiddush. That if I ask you, how often do you have to put on tefillin? Yeah, here's a guy. Hey, how come you never wear tefillin? You lazy bum, why do you stay in bed? Yeah, I put it on once a year. He says to me, you only read Parshas Zachar once a year, so I only put on tefillin once a year. How often do you have to put on tefillin? Every day. Why? The Torah doesn't say wear tefillin every day. So, how often do you have to daven? The Rambam learns tefillah is a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa. They have to pray how often? The Rambam says once a day. Look at number 32. The Rambam says, Mitzvahs aseh lehispalel b'chol yom. It's a mitzvah to daven every day. Why every day? Why once a day? Why not once a month, once a week, once a year, once an hour? Where does the time frame once a day come from? The Stipler says, a klal, look at number 31, the Stipler in Bracha says, that if the Torah gives a mitzvah, and the Torah does not say when, the time frame is once a day. It's a klal. That if the Torah gives the Jewish people a mitzvah, daven, put on tefillin, you got to do it at least once a day. That is the reasonable time frame. In other words, the unit is, I would say a unit is an hour, 12 hours, a month, a week. No. The unit of time for the Torah is a day. And this idea is enunciated by the Ramban, also by the Kesef Mishnah. They both say, well, the Rambam seems to indicate that davening is once a day. Says the Ramban, why? Why once a day? Because what are you going to say? Once a year? Once a lifetime? It's ein hadas soivel davar zeh, the Kesef Mishnah says. Without any further indication, without any guidance, when the Torah gives a mitzvah, the reasonable assumption is the Torah means to mandate it once a day. You see that by tefillah, that's what the Rambam says, you have to daven once a day. You see that by tefillin. By the way, I'll tell you just very quickly. You remember the Gemara by Elisha Bal Knafayim? The Romans made a decree, you're now to wear tefillin. And the senator caught Elisha wearing tefillin. So he said, what are you doing? What's in your hands? Elisha had ran away, and he put the tefillin in his hands. And he said, what's in your hands? So, the Gemara says, yeah, the oldest trick in the book. He opened his hands, and the bird flew out, right? So the Kesef Mishnah asks, why wasn't he Moiser Nefesh? He should have given up his life. We know that if the Goyim try to stop you from doing a mitzvah, B'shas Hashmad, you have to give up your life. Says the Kesef Mishnah, they weren't stopping him from doing any mitzvah. He was already Mekayim the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah of tefillin is only once a day. Sure, if you wear it more, but the Yikar mitzvah is once a day. Well, this idea, that if the Torah does not give a guideline as how often to perform a mitzvah, it's once a day. So presumably, Rabbi Isai, according to the Rambam, the mitzvah to remember Amalek is how often? It's very reasonable to assume it's no different than tefillah, it's no different than tefillin, it's no different than any mitzvah, that the Torah does not tell you when to fulfill it. It's once a day. When the Rambam says tamid, and the Rambam says b'choles, presumably it's once a day. And in fact, look at number 41, the Sefer Charedim of Rabbi Elazar Azkiri, he brings down the opinion of Tosfos that we do it once a year. But he says, from the Rambam, it's mashma, the mitzvah is once a day. Like we're saying. So one simple question. When, according to the Rambam, when do we do this mitzvah? Yeah? Tefillin we do, right? We're good with tefillin. We all put on the tefillin, yeah? Tefillah, we daven at least. Midares, you have down once a day. Midrabanan, you have down 3 times a day. But when do you do the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? So you say, well, that's why they print in the back of the Sidurim the Sheish Zechiros. And until they put that in the Siddur, when did they do it? I mean, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, according to the Rambam. When are you supposed to do the mitzvah? It doesn't say anywhere in the whole day anything about Amalek. According to the Rambam, there's a mitzvah once a day. So you say, we don't paskin like the Rambam because the Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos. Okay, fine. But the Rambam, what would he say? When would the Rambam recommend a Jew fulfill the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? So, there's an amazing Magen Avram. Magen Avram says, look at number 42. And if you follow this Magen Avram, you'll be adding to your repertoire at least 2,000 mitzvahs a year. Okay? So if you need any extra mitzvahs, if you follow this Magen Avram, 2,000 extra mitzvahs a year. The Magen Avram says like this, in Siman Samach and Hilchos Kriyashma, that there are a mitzvah to remember Matan Torah every day. When do you fulfill that? There's a mitzvah to remember Maimed Har Sinai every day. There's a mitzvah to remember what Miriam did. When do you do that? There's a mitzvah to remember Shabbos every day. When do you do that? There's a mitzvah to remember the Chet HaEgel every day. When do you do that? Says the Magen Avram, you can knock it off in one paragraph. You ready for this? In Ava Rabbah, when you say the words Uvanu v'acharta, God, you chose us, you should think about Matan Torah. And then you're Mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa of remembering Matan Torah. And the Magen Avram says, when you say V'kerav Tanu, you brought us close, you have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of remembering Ma'amad Har Sinai. And when you say the words L'shimcha Hagadol, God, you brought us close to your great name, you know what you have in mind? The mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek. What does L'shimcha Hagadol have to do with Amalek? Because we know so long as Amalek isn't around, Kiyad al Kes Ka, God's name is incomplete. So we say, God, you brought us close to your great name. That's the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. So you say, Magen Avram, why do I have to remember Amalek? I do it once a year. According to Tosfos, that's all you have to do. Magen Avram apparently is saying, if you want to fulfill the opinion of the Rambam, the designated time is when you say the words L'shimcha Hagadol. And when you say in Shema, Zachartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem, you should have in mind, remember Shabbos, which is equal to all the mitzvahs. And then when you say the word Bi'ahava, you should think that now God loves us. But when we did the Egel, He wasn't so happy with us. So if you would like an extra 2,000 mitzvahs a year, then all you have to do is take this Magen Avram. Just remember what to think by those words. And it's an easy 2,000 mitzvahs a year. Right? If I would offer you $2,000, let's say I would offer you right now $2,000. First of all, the line would be out the door. No, I wouldn't be able to go home tonight. So I'm just telling you, I'm giving you more than that. I'm giving you 2,000 mitzvahs, and you don't have to say the Sheish Zechiros. Everyone's busy after the davening, right? With all the different things, Pitamak Toires and Sheish Zechiros and Yud Gimel Ikrim and all these things. First thing you need to do, by the way, is come to Shul on time. Forget about all the extra things in the Siddur. First you got to say the things that you have to say. But you don't even have to say that. You could get everything in Ahava Rabbah. Okay. So that's the Shita of the Rambam. Okay? You got it? You're right. We don't paskin like the Rambam, necessarily. Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos. And the Yikar Zechira is once a year, B'tzibur. But if you want to get in the Shita of the Rambam, and we explained the Rambam presumably holds it's every day, the best way to do it, L'shimcha Hagadol, every day. L'shimcha Hagadol Zechiras Amalek. But let's just end with this. And we had to leave out a lot, but what can we do? The opinion that we do paskin like is the opinion of Tosfos. Tosfos holds, when do you fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa? Remember Amalek? Once a year. What in the world is this mitzvah of remembering it once a year? There's no other mitzvah we do once a year. We're talking about matzah, this, that. Yeah, those are mitzvahs that are governed by time. The first night of Pesach only comes once a year. The first night of Sukkot only comes once a year. But if it's a mitzvah to remember, then you always have to remember. What is the logic? What sense does it make to do a mitzvah once a year? And that's how we paskin, be'ikar halacha. Paskin like Tosfos. Why once a year? You ready for this? Comes the Chassam Sofer in a tshuva in Even HaEzer, Siman Kuf Yates, number 45. And the Chassam Sofer says like this. The mitzvah is to remember, but then the Torah adds, don't forget. So what kind of remembering does it have to be? A remembering of not forgetting. Well, how long does it take not to forget something? In other words, at what point in time does one begin to forget something? Says the Chassam Sofer. The Gemara says, someone passes away. Ein hames mishtakech min alev ela la'achar 12 chodesh. A close relative, a person who passes away, is only forgotten after 12 months. In other words, why is Avelos 12 months? Because after 12 months, the memory begins to fade to some extent. It's not as acute. It's not as painful. It fades a little bit. So says the Chassam Sofer, you see from this Gemara, that when 12 months pass, you begin to forget. So if the mitzvah to remember Amalek is remember and don't forget, so you have to remember it in a way that you don't forget. How often? Once every 12 months. After 12 months, you're going to begin to forget. But if you remembered once in 12 months, over the course of 12 months, you'll still remember. And then when 12 months pass, you have to remind yourself again. So Chassam Sofer says, well, what did they used to do when they learned the Torah every 3 years in the triennial cycle of reading the Torah every 3 years, right? So he says, well, Beshalach they did the first year, Kiseitze the third year. But I'll ask you a question. What are you doing in Ibriyar? If the reason for Parshas Zachar is because it takes 12 months for you, what are you doing in a leap year? Comes along the Maram Shik, the Talmud of Chassam Sofer, and he writes, he was in the presence of the Chassam Sofer when someone asked the Chassam Sofer this question: what do you do in a leap year with the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? They're 13 months. And the Chassam Sofer responded, in a leap year, you need to be mechavein, that when they lay in Parshas Kiseitze, to be mekayim the mitzvah da'iraisa of Zechiras Amalek. Says Maram Shik, I heard my Rabbi, the Chassam Sofer, say those words, that in a leap year. So Rabbi, so we have two opinions. The opinion that the Shulchan Aruch passes like is the opinion of Tosfos, that the Iker mitzvah is once a year, and you need a minyan midai raisa. Why? Because it's a minyan, it's a mitzvah mutal al tzibur. And the opinion of the Rambam, it's a mitzvah which is daily, and if you want to fulfill it, you could fulfill it when, according to the Magen Avraham, when you get up to the words of the Shimcha Hagadol. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you for coming.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.